to 1.9%.
Meanwhile, Fed officials also starting to look beyond the worst of the crisis. The Vice Chair, Richard Clarida, tells CNBC he expects US GDP to expand in both the third and fourth quarters. St. Louis Fed Chief James Bullard said keeping shutdowns too long would cause long-run problems, but Chicago's Charles Evans was more cautious, calling the lifting of restrictions a bold decision with pretty high risks.
It's interesting, Roger, because I saw Clarida's comments as ever so slightly more positive than what we heard from Jay Powell in his last news conference. But the equity market certainly took a little bit of a hit off the back of his comments on more government support needed. Now, sticking with central bank news, the ECB is defiant in the face of a German court ruling questioning its bond buying program. It's pledging to continue doing everything necessary to revive inflation. In a statement, the ECB also noted that Europe's top court had previously said its QE program was legal. The German court is giving the central bank 3 months to prove its asset purchase program complies with the law. And let's just talk about the law just for a second, Roger, because the court president, Andres Voskula, said the ruling only concerns the duty of the ECB to scrutinize its own action under a proportionality guideline and to document that. The ECB isn't per se blocked in any way. But you look at the market reaction we had yesterday and you look at some of the reaction just generally in terms of comments from investors, and either you could attribute the reaction yesterday to just there's so much uncertainty, so much question, so BTP sell off. But then you do have the likes of Commerzbank saying, actually, this takes the edge off whatever it takes. And you've also got Aberdeen Standard Investments and UBS both being concerned about a potential knock-on effect on PEP.
Yeah, and the interesting thing in all this is, of course, it's not actually about the current arrangements. It's all reflecting back on much, much earlier arrangements. And really key to it is the judiciability of this, the extent to which German courts have oversight over what's going on the European level. And that speaks to the whole nature of the European project.
Yeah, indeed. And let's get a look at how equity markets are doing here almost 14 minutes into the equity market open. Futures were pointing lower, but actually the cash trade absolutely dead flat on the Stock 600. Taking a check on BTPs, the 10-year yield jumped 17 basis points at one point yesterday. We drop a basis point today. This is Bloomberg.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, makes innovation happen. NJIT faculty mentored Christoph Camacho when he was a student, helping him co-found a startup and patent a device that uses drone technology for reforestation and to collect valuable data for land management.
I founded Paratrees back in 2016, taking what I learned from my research at NJIT and migrating it to a startup. Our technology is to really enhance land management operations, so we work very closely with land management companies. So we have a drone that performs precision reforestation, and we do storm damage assessment, having access to drones that can collect data so it's much faster. And what is more important, we help them drive management decisions. NJIT has been there every step of the way, going full force with my company.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home. While you stay inside, enjoy a curated collection of archived concerts and behind-the-scenes stories from BSO musicians. BSO Homeschool provides lessons for music lovers of all ages. New performances and messages from musicians are added regularly. Enjoy these selections and much more at bso.org/at-home.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Tom McKenzie.
Joining us, former Hong Kong Exchange chairman and one-time Carrie Lam campaign manager, of course, Ron Arcouli. This re-escalation of tensions between Beijing and Washington over the origins of the virus. Are you concerned that if we get to a situation where the Trump administration is looking at reimposing tariffs, that Hong Kong is again hit by that as another potential headwind for the city?
Obviously, trade wars doesn't do any good, and there are really no winners. But it is election year in the U.S. And during election year, sometimes strange things and unexpected things happen. But I hope that common sense will prevail, and that if Mr. Trump gets reelected, there could be new dialogue on the trade front, as well as on other issues. If a new administration comes in, the issue has been around long enough, and Mr. Biden, the Democratic candidate, knows China and knows Hong Kong well, and knows the U.S. and China relationship importance. So, I'm cautiously optimistic that post-election, there might be a firmer, clearer path for the two countries.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from London. I'm Sandra Kilhoff with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Now, it's a bit of a mixed trading day today. China has reopened after a 3-day holiday, and so we are kind of seeing investors digesting that. Currently, the Stock 600 is flat, the FTSE flat similarly, so the DAX down 0.1%, the CAC 40 slipping 0.4%. This in part down to the fact that Crédit Agricole, for instance, a big French lender, has slipped slightly in trading after announcing some fairly big loan loss provisions on the back of the coronavirus impact. One stock gainer, however, to keep an eye on today is ITV, up 2.3%. It did warn about a severe impact on ad revenues, but at the same time said BritBox, its new online streaming service, is doing quite well, and that is what's boosting the stock, now actually up more than 3% here in London. US futures pointing higher at the moment. If we take a look in the currency markets, we are seeing the yen enjoying a bit of a haven bid, currently at a 7-week high at 106.3. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is flat. We are seeing G10 currencies fairly range-bound, with sterling at 124 and the euro at 108 this morning. Over in the bond markets, 10-year treasury yields are up more than a basis point at 68 basis points. Similarly so for bund yields, up 2 basis points to negative 56. 10-year gilt yields are slightly higher as well at 22 basis points this morning. In commodities, it's all about gold after some very bullish bets on bullion. Gold-backed ETF holdings also reaching a record high. Gold now at $1,705 a troy ounce. Over in the oil markets, WTI is standing pat following 5 days of gains, currently at $24 a barrel. That's Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Dan Garens with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. Global coronavirus cases have passed 3.6 million and deaths exceed 256,000, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. In light of this, drug companies are stepping up efforts to tackle the coronavirus. Gilead is in talks with manufacturers to supply remdesivir, its treatment that has been cleared by U.S. health regulators for emergency use. The talks cover production for Europe, Asia and the developing world. Now, the Chinese city of Wuhan, where the coronavirus originated, was silent for months as it went into lockdown, but schools are reopening in the epicenter for the first time since the outbreak began. Senior students in Hubei province are returning today, but most pupils will remain at home. And the number of new coronavirus cases in Germany rose for the first time in 6 days. This comes ahead of talks between Chancellor Angela Merkel and regional leaders. That's happening later today. Merkel has been under mounting pressure to speed up the country's exit from lockdown and reignite Europe's biggest economy. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on QuickTake by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Jan Gerens. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now let's get back to earnings and banks in particular. Crédit Agricole setting aside almost 3 times the amount it booked a year ago to cover souring loans because of the impact of the coronavirus. Provisions in the first 3 months of the year jumped to 621 million euros. Meanwhile, UniCredit posted a $2.9 billion loss on its virus charges. For more, let's bring in Jonathan Tice, Senior Banks Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. Jonathan, great to speak to you this morning. Let's just kick it off with Crédit Agricole, because we can't help but make a point of comparison with rivals and BNP Paribas and SocGen, and Crédit Agricole being more diversified and less dependent on trading, didn't see quite the same exposure, the CFO said, to market dislocations. Is that a positive to be taken away for Crédit Agricole relative to BNP Paribas and SocGen, or is the market just simply focused on the provisions?
Good morning. Well, I mean, in terms of diversification, BNP is the most diversified model. And don't forget, an awful lot of Crédit Agricole's growth has been through its majority stake in Amundi, which has clearly been hit by the market sell-off. So from kind of a relative French perspective, Crédit Agricole's trading, yes, they're less dependent than, say, SocGen, but I mean, FIC was only up 15%, and French retail is still a fairly large component for them. So I think they face more domestic and more kind of equity market headwinds than the other two, and they've delivered pretty much in line, reasonable revenues. The cost of risk has been a complete guesstimate for everybody, but of the three, the pick of the bunch has to be BNP yesterday, because the main reason, the guidance they've given is miles ahead of consensus. They're pretty comfortable with it. Their provision that they took in terms of basis points of loans is not out of kilter with what Crédit Agricole are telling us, or SocGen. So I would think that from a diversification standpoint, BNP looks best relative so far.
Yeah, well, let's move on to UniCredit in this, because it is interesting that they have, I mean, broadly, it was within the adjusted consensus pretty much, but they were the first big European bank to try and quantify the impact of the virus, giving provisions and predicting 13% contraction. So have they gained, at least from some of their foresight, perhaps?
Well, certainly the charge they've taken today. I mean, don't forget, a lot of the loss they've reported is to do with the way they account for their Yapı Kredi Turkish stake and not the underlying business. Their provision is actually less painful than they guided to. In terms of the game, well, I mean, clearly they've been at the epicenter, Italy, of what's going on, but versus, say, an Intesa, whose numbers yesterday were a little bit better, I think, they're much more internationally spread business. So it's great that they gave us guidance early on, which is why the stock's hardly moving. And as I say, the big loss is just a headline loss. This is more about the sort of tax treatment of Yapı Kredi, et cetera, et cetera. Underlying trends, it's all about revenue from here, because we know that the banks and the analysts won't know really what the ultimate cost of risk provision is for the crisis, at least till middle of next year, if not later.
Great to have you with us, Jonathan Tice, our senior banks analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. And just to give you an update on how both those stocks are trading, I mean, Jonathan did sort of allude to this just now, but UniCredit down almost 0.8%, so not really a big move to the downside. And in terms of Crédit Agricole, what you're seeing is a move to the downside of 0.6%. So really fairly muted moves there, Roger. And on Crédit Agricole, of course, in terms of the comparison to BNP Paribas and SocGen, it was more so that it sort of avoided the dividend-related equity trading hit that hurt the larger rivals. So that's wrapping up the banks. What are we looking ahead to?
Well, we're going to be talking about from big banks to central banks, because we're talking about the ECB and its response to that German court ruling that the central bank must prove its quantitative easing is in line with the law. An interesting judgment, because it referred to a previous arrangement, but the principle does seem to have somewhat, roiled the markets.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. They call Disneyland the happiest place on earth, but there's little to be happy about at Walt Disney. Quarterly earnings fell sharply from a year ago, with its theme parks especially hard hit. Its film and TV businesses also suffered. One glimmer of good news: Shanghai Disneyland will reopen next week. Hope springs eternal on Wall Street as hope for an end to the coronavirus lockdowns continues to rally stocks. But strategist Katie Kaminsky at Alpha Simplex Group warns that caution may be in order.
We are often quick to hope and slow to face despair, so a little glimmer of hope has the ability to definitely rally the market.
The main averages finished with modest gains, ranging from about 0.5% for the Dow to 1% for the NASDAQ. When Lord & Taylor reopens after the pandemic lockdowns ease, it'll put up the going out of business sign. Reuters reports the department store chain will liquidate its 38 stores. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
If you're having a business dispute, you know time is money. The longer your case proceeds, the more your case can cost. So speed up your resolution with the American Arbitration Association. Arbitration with the American Arbitration Association is faster. In fact, the median time frame for an American Arbitration Association B2B arbitration to be awarded is nearly 16 months faster than the U.S. courts. ADR.org. Resolve faster.
Asset managers whose seas changed.
If you want to do something important, work in adult social care. I'm Georgia. I love social care because you never know what each day will bring. The thing that I would say to anybody that was thinking about a job in social care is go for it. We are recruiting in your local area. We need you now, and they need you always. Care for others. Make a difference. Today. Search adult social care jobs now.
The football boots that will help her score her first hat-trick. The tech that keeps you connected. The cozy jumpers that are perfect for snuggling up together. With a choice of ways to pay, you can make the most of family time. You can say yes when it matters most at very.co.uk. Goods and services provided by Shop Direct Home Shopping Limited. Credit provided by Shop Direct Finance Company Limited.
A half-price dream holiday, wouldn't want to miss that. A takeaway for free, wouldn't want to miss that. And 30 gigs data for just £10 a month on Smarty Mobile. You definitely don't want to miss that. Our Smarty SIM comes packed with 30 gigs of data and unlimited calls and texts for just £10 a month on a 1-month plan. That's why Smarty won Best Value SIM-only network in the Uswitch Mobile Awards 2020. Don't miss out. Search Smarty Mobile. Smarty. Simple, honest mobile. Smarty.co.uk.
Picture in your mind a stylish Audi with striking LED headlights, sporty alloy wheels, and some of our most advanced features, including a 10-inch digital cockpit and smart assistant systems like lane departure warning. Picture what that Audi looks like. Now think smaller. The Audi A1. It's not a small car, it's a small Audi. Visit audi.co.uk. Audi. Vorsprung durch Technik.
When next in Asda, why not try our new mobile Scan and Go app? Simply download the app, scan your shop with your mobile, and pack as you go. Then head to the self-checkout to pay. Quick, easy, and contact-free, so you have more time to get your cook on. Asda. Mobile data charges may apply. Suitable for iOS 9 and Android 5 or above. Selected stores subject to availability.
While most of us are looking out for each other at this time, sadly, fraudsters are trying to take advantage of the situation. Here's Chris Ainsley from Santander with advice for keeping your money safe.
Phishing emails are designed to trick you into giving away personal details. Messages might be about travel refunds, delivery tracking, or supermarket vouchers. Remember, never click on links or attachments in emails received out of the blue.
For more advice on keeping your money safe, visit santander.co.uk.
Think live to London on DAB Digital Radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
8:30 a.m. in London, 9:30 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. Good morning, everyone. I'm Neera Chehich.
And I'm Roger Hearing, and you're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Roger, 30 minutes into the equity market open in Europe, we're getting absolutely no direction on a headline level from the Stock 600, dead flat. If we look at regional equity benchmarks, the FTSE 100 is up 0.1%, the CAC 40 down by 0.4%, the DAX lower by 0.25 percentage point, the IBEX down 0.8%, FTSE MIB down 0.3%. So there is a little bit of a skew towards risk off if you look across regional equity benchmarks, but overall no huge moves. In terms of US futures, so we saw the S&P 500 give up half its gains yesterday following comments from the Fed's Richard Clarida in terms of there needing to be more government support, even as he talked about a recovery from the pandemic in the second half of the year. Futures point to a positive open. Dow, S&P and NASDAQ futures all higher by at least 0.6%. In terms of the 10-year Treasury yield, that sort of reflects the risk-on skew in terms of the potential for US markets, up a basis point, a 67 handle. We're also seeing yields move higher in Europe. The 10-year Bund yield up 1.5 basis points, negative 56. The 10-year gilt yield is steady. Interestingly, the 10-year BTP yield, so of course yesterday we saw a big reaction to the German court ruling on the ECB's quantitative easing program. We'll discuss it in depth in a moment. We saw BTP 10-year yields jump as much as 17 basis points. They dipped earlier in the session, but now we're up 2 basis points, 189 handle. It was the 2-year yield that bore the brunt of the moves yesterday, and the Italian 2-year yield is actually steady on a 73 handle today. In terms of FX, you're seeing a bit of a mixed picture in G10 against the dollar. A little bit of dollar weakness, I would say, is the skew. Yen strength seems to be the story. The euro steady. It came under some pressure earlier. Of course, we got to the 108 handle on that ECB news yesterday. 108.31 is where we sit right now. And after a 5-day rally that saw WTI jump 20% yesterday, we're seeing that fade in oil today. WTI down 0.6%, 24.41. Brent a little higher, up 0.25 percentage point, just above $31 a barrel.
Right, let's go on to some of today's top stories. Now, the number of deaths from the virus in the UK is now greater than that in Italy, making Britain the worst hit country in Europe. The grim milestone adds pressure on the government, which has faced criticism for its handling of the pandemic. It's come as some nations, of course, are starting to ease their lockdowns. Here, the British Chambers of Commerce says most businesses could reopen within days, with smaller firms being the fastest back on their feet.
In the US, President Donald Trump is pushing to get the economy to reopen. He says Americans should begin returning to their everyday lives, but he acknowledges it could lead to even more suffering, including more deaths. The White House is already talking about disbanding its pandemic task force as the rise in new virus cases slowed to 1.9%.
And in earnings news this morning, UniCredit's posted a €2.7 billion loss. Provisions related to the virus are adding to its pain, but the lender's main business was resilient in the first quarter, with income beating estimates. UniCredit was the first big European bank to try to quantify the pandemic's impact. It set aside €900 million for bad loans last month.
And investors in Disney got a glimpse of how bad the coronavirus outbreak will be for the world's largest entertainment company. Disney said the crisis cost it $1.4 billion in lost profit last quarter, and this quarter is expected to be worse. But Disney did say its resort in Shanghai will report next week.
Right, let's get the latest now in global news from Leanne Gerrans. And Leanne, you start here in the UK.
Yes, indeed. Good morning, Roger, and thank you. Let's start here in the UK, as you said. The scientist whose analysis pushed Boris Johnson to put the country into lockdown has resigned from his advisory role. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts has more details.
Neil Ferguson has stepped back from SAGE, the government's scientific advisory group for emergencies. That's after the Telegraph reported he'd broken social distancing rules to meet a woman described as his lover. Ferguson's team produced the influential model in March, which suggested coronavirus deaths could reach 250,000 without a lockdown. He says he acted in the belief that he was immune, but deeply regrets any undermining of the government's messaging on social distancing. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global coronavirus cases have passed 3.6 million, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. After weeks of strict lockdown measures, some European countries are now returning to a new normal. But in France, death linked to the coronavirus rose at the fastest pace in 6 days. But as Bloomberg's Anya Nussbaum explains, the country has been living with the virus for much longer than previously reported.
It turns out that a patient who was hospitalized with flu-like symptoms in December had COVID. Doctors found he had the disease by retroactively testing his samples. The man had not traveled recently. So the questions are, how was this patient infected? How long has the virus been around for? And how many cases have gone unreported? In Paris, Anya Nussbaum, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Elsewhere, the number of new coronavirus cases in Germany also surged for the first time in 6 days. This comes ahead of talks between Chancellor Angela Merkel and regional leaders on further easing restrictions on public life. That's happening later today. Now more on the ratcheting up of tensions between the US and China. US President Donald Trump continues to push past US intelligence doubts to say the coronavirus likely came from a Chinese lab in Wuhan. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also agrees, saying the evidence is clear, but US and intelligence agencies around the world are casting doubt on that theory. Last week's assessment from the intelligence community ruled out the possibility the virus was man-made. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Roger.
Leanne, thanks for that. Now, a critical German court ruling on the European Central Bank's quantitative easing programme is causing some worry amongst investors. The issue at hand is whether the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Programme, the PEP, constitutes monetary financing, and firms like Aberdeen and UBS now suggest the ruling could force the ECB to be more careful in how it buys debt, raising the risk of a knock-on effect on the Eurozone's most fragile bond markets. For more, let's go live to Frankfurt, where Bloomberg's central banks editor, Paul Gordon, is standing by. Paul, first of all, just take us inside this ruling up to a point. I mean, it's not. This is a ruling that refers to a previous arrangement. How clear is it that it applies to what's going on now?
Well, it's absolutely clear that it does not apply directly to what's going on now. You're right, this refers to the asset purchase program.